So President Trump spoke at least twice with Vladimir Putin over the past several months this spring, setting the stage for prospective talks this summer. What might they be about?
I think they're going to talk about extending START. Uh, as much as START has been reviled by many critics, ironically, this is the one thing most likely to be extended. Now, I don't know how they're going to be able to do that if they don't also talk about addressing the violation of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. Russia had deployed a cruise missile that clearly is beyond the range and is beyond the perimeters of what's allowed for ground-launched nuclear-capable missiles. So those two things surely are what they're going to talk about. Now, what they're going to agree to, that's a separate matter. But if there's a will, I always say with these things, there's always a way. So we'll see what happens.
Well, what should they talk about?
Well, they have to talk about these things, so they should. I guess the bigger question is, what if they keep talking? Then I guess it's a little more complicated. Then you got to talk about something else, because you might agree. You see, this is always the casualty or a risk you take in diplomacy. You might succeed, and then what do you talk about? And you have to come up with new topics. I think the INF compliance matter naturally dovetails into something the Russians have been demanding. They don't like talking about extending the INF treaty unless, of course, we somehow deal with their complaints about missile defenses, which is just a big problem in and of itself. But putting that aside, the Russians also say, well, if we continue to adhere to INF, it only makes sense if we include more countries. Well, who are they talking about? The Chinese. And why? Well, the Chinese actually have more ground-launched missiles than any other country in the world, and most of them are in the intermediate range. A good number of them are. I mean, well, why would the Russians care about limiting the Chinese? Well, they have a border. They also have less than terrific history. I mean, in the late 60s, there was a bit of a military exercise. People got killed. I mean, it was a war, very short, like a week or so. The Russians are worried about the Chinese. Chinese, I don't know, but so one of the things that's been suggested sort of in the literature, I mean, I'm not sure if anybody in the administration buys onto this, is you might say, well, we can allow you to have your INF missiles, including the ones that violate the treaty. We'll allow those, but you have to base them facing towards China. It's not so crazy. It was part of the original negotiation to consider this. But it's going back to some old ideas. If you did that, you could turn to the Chinese and say, you may not like that. And, we actually appreciate that you might not like that. Would you like to limit any of your systems so that we could get rid of those Russian systems? I don't know. It's a kabuki, But for my money, I think that would be a rather interesting discussion, because I don't see how we make the world safe against ballistic missile threats without limiting the number of them, at least in the short run, because the technology to defend against them is not where it needs to be. If you get enough missiles, you overwhelm our defenses. So if we want to make the world safe, even for missile defenses, we need fewer offensive missiles. So that might be one topic. That would be one. Another topic, my favorite, is, I guess what it would be, trying to get the Russians to adopt tighter rules on sharing reactors with countries in the Middle East and the Far East, wherever, to get them to say, as we try to say, if you take our reactors, you cannot reprocess or enrich, which brings you very much to the brink of bomb making. There are reasons why the Russians might be persuaded to do this. Their market is large, but their finances are small. Their safety record is pretty awful. They actually would like, I think, to resume nuclear cooperation with the United States in the civil sector. We turned it off after the Ukraine invasion. There's something there that might be played with. I don't think, to be honest, anyone's thinking about that one. The last thing that I can think of in just a very general way, I wrote about this in the National Interest. It was called Dealing Huge, a Trumpian Arms Control Agenda. Because, I'm imagining, well, you may get reelected. I mean, we have 7 years we have to fill here, not just as, 7 hours. 7 years. What is this agenda going to be? The third area would be an emerging threat that needs to be addressed, and that is the prospect of space Pearl Harbor induced by the introduction of actually peaceful civil satellites that the European Union, Russia, and China, and the United States are putting in space to pick up space debris. They have arms that can grab the stuff. They can maneuver. Well, these are the same kinds of devices that could take out an important space asset, like a satellite that we need to see, hear, or direct our troops. If they're sitting very close to those satellites, we wouldn't have time to react if they attacked us. So what you need to do is set up some rules for everybody where everybody keeps their distance and they announce constantly where they are. And if they stop announcing where they are, well, they're in violation and they might be subject to penalties and possibly if they have too many, according to the rules you would set up, too close, too long, near key assets of another country, that country would have the right to self-defense. Now, this is a little sporty, but you could combine it with also limits on not allowing certain kinds of things to be tested, like direct descent, ASATs, etc. I mean, it's quite complicated. But I think everyone, not just the United States, has an interest in talking about what their thoughts are on how to make space a place that doesn't become the front line of combat and a place where people get deterred from helping their friends stay safe, etc. I think that's another big area where conversation doesn't come with much penalty. Whether you can reach an agreement or not so clear. But the incentives for everyone should be reasonably high on all sides. Another topic area, perhaps. I mean, I could go on, but those are three. That's enough.